The dust never really settles in the forgotten corners of this country. It just waits, heavy and fine, ready to choke the unwary. We see the headlines, stories of wealth, innovation, and endless sunshine, but beneath that polished surface, there are cracks, fissures where the light never reaches, and in those shadows, that's where the real stories are born. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the truth about the line between good and evil, and how sometimes the only people willing to cross that line for the right reasons are the ones you've been taught to fear the most. This is about the Black Aces Motorcycle Club, a brotherhood forged in rebellion, chrome, and a defiant rejection of polite society. They wear their patches like armor, their reputations preceding them like a storm cloud. Most people see the leather, the Harleys, the hard faces, and they cross the street. They see outlaws. They see thugs. They see everything that's wrong with the world. But you're about to see something different. You're about to see the Black Aces MC step into a world of pure, quiet terror, not to dominate it, but to save a soul from drowning in it. Our story starts not in a back alley or a smoky bar, but in a place that should be sacred, a home. The house itself was unremarkable. Faded siding, a chipped bird bath on the lawn, and a silence that felt less like peace and more like a heavy blanket draped over sorrow. Inside, though, the silence was shattered. It was a war zone of words, the kind of psychological violence that leaves no bruises but scars the deepest. Elara was 10 years old. She had hair the color of weak tea, eyes that were perpetually wide and afraid, and a heart that was trying desperately to hold itself together. She wasn't just small for her age. She seemed to shrink daily, folding inward to escape the noise. Her mother, Sarah, was a woman battling demons Elara couldn't comprehend, demons fueled by resentment, exhaustion, and alcohol. Sarah wasn't an evil woman, not in the sense of a storybook villain. She was simply a broken one, and broken people often shatter the things closest to them. On this particular evening, Elara was trying to do her homework at the kitchen table. The air was thick with the scent of stale wine and failure. Sarah was leaning against the counter, her face contorted, her voice starting low, vibrating with dangerous intensity, before escalating into a brutal verbal assault. "Why can't you get this right, Elara? Look at this, it's garbage. You're just like your father, useless and lazy. You think I have time for this? I work two jobs just so you can sit here and fail a simple math problem. I swear, you make everything harder." The words were projectiles, aimed perfectly at the most vulnerable part of a child's mind. Elara didn't cry. She just tensed, her small hands gripping the pencil so tightly her knuckles were white. She had learned long ago that crying only added fuel to the fire. Sarah took a ragged step toward the table, her shadow looming. She snatched the worksheet, crumpled it with savage force, and threw it across the room. She was shaking, not with rage alone, but with a terrifying, self-loathing desperation. And then, the ultimate cruelty, the 4 words that can undo a childhood faster than any physical blow, the verbal knife twist that leaves an indelible mark. She pointed a trembling finger at the girl and screamed, "You're worthless!" The echo of that shout lingered, hanging in the stagnant air like a toxic cloud. Elara didn't move. She couldn't. She was paralyzed, her world reduced to the ringing in her ears and the absolute conviction that her mother was right. She was worthless, a burden, a mistake. She just wished she could disappear. But Elara wasn't alone. Outside, the rumbling had begun minutes earlier. It was a low, heavy sound, the collective heartbeat of a dozen V-twin engines. They belonged to the Black Aces MC, and they were not there by accident. In the world of the MC, information travels along unseen wires. The network of outlaws, the people who live on the fringes, they know things the police don't, things the social workers can't easily discover. They have ears in bars, on the roads, and even in the quiet neighborhoods. A call had come in earlier to Hammer, the sergeant-at-arms of the Black Aces, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite and whose hands were as large as shovels. The call was simple: a 10-year-old girl, an unstable mother, and a situation that was escalating past the point of no return. The source was shaky, a former club prospect who had gone straight, but owed Hammer a favor. The Black Aces don't involve themselves in domestic issues lightly. They have a code, dark and archaic as it is, and children are sacrosanct. They are the future, and no future should be born in terror. Hammer, along with his president, Grave, and a handful of trusted brothers, had rolled up the street minutes after Sarah's breakdown began. They killed their engines simultaneously, the resulting silence almost oppressive. They were dressed in their full colors, heavy black leather, patches, and vests that announced their identity with brutal honesty. They looked exactly like the bogeyman of suburbia. Grave, a man of terrifying calm and authority, motioned for Hammer to take the lead. They moved up the cracked walkway with the practiced stealth of men who have spent their lives navigating danger. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They simply turned the knob. It was unlocked, and pushed the door open, allowing the silence of the night to mix with the chaos inside. Sarah had her back to the door, still trembling, still catching her breath from her outburst. Elara was slumped over the table, trying to make herself invisible. The sight of the child's profound misery was a gut punch even to men who prided themselves on having no feelings. Grave leaned against the doorframe, letting his presence fill the room before he spoke. Hammer moved silently. He took 2 large strides, his boots echoing faintly on the linoleum floor, and stood directly behind Sarah. He was a mountain of a man, his shadow engulfing her. Sarah finally became aware of the change in the atmosphere. She inhaled sharply, her head whipping around, a fresh wave of angry words already forming on her lips, but they died instantly, choked by the sight before her. She didn't see one man, she saw a wall of black leather, skulls, and fire, the dreaded Black Aces. The sight of the monstrous, silent figure standing directly behind her was the final, terrifying punctuation mark to her rage. Her eyes went wide with pure, animalistic fear. The only sound in the room now was the frantic, shallow breathing of Sarah and the deep, even breathing of Hammer, who remained absolutely silent, simply blocking her path to the terrified child. It was Grave who finally spoke, his voice low, gravelly, and impossibly calm, cutting through the tension like a razor wire. He looked past Sarah, past the wreckage of the homework, and addressed the small girl at the table, who was now slowly raising her head, her eyes meeting his. "You're not worthless, kid," Grave said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 miles of road. "You hear me? You are not worthless." The words weren't a question or a plea. They were a command, an absolute declaration of truth delivered by a man the world called evil. This was the first intervention, the first step in reclaiming a life. But the mother was still a problem. Sarah stood frozen, the realization of who these men were crashing over her like a cold wave. These were not the local police, who might issue a warning or file a report. These were the Black Aces. Their reputation ensured that their presence carried far more weight than any badge. They were judge, jury, and often executioner in their own world. And they were in her kitchen, protecting her child from her. Grave didn't take his eyes off Elara. His entire demeanor was focused on the girl, projecting a deep, unexpected calm. Hammer, still a silent monolith behind the mother, finally shifted his weight, the sound of his heavy leather vest rustling, cutting sharply into the silence. It was a subtle, yet massive sound, a physical reminder of the power holding Sarah captive in her own terror. Sarah finally found her voice, but it was thin, shaky, and laced with disbelief. Who are you? Get out of my house. I'll call the police," she stammered, attempting to summon the authority she'd just been using to tear down her daughter. Grave chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against the silence. "Go ahead, Sarah. Call them. Tell them the Black Aces are sitting in your kitchen making sure your kid doesn't hear another scream like that one. See how fast they get here. Or better yet, tell them what you just told your daughter." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Tell them you called a 10-year-old worthless." The mother's face crumbled, the rage draining away, replaced by the raw, ugly realization of her failure and the terrifying consequence standing before her. She wasn't just facing her own demons anymore. She was facing a different kind of justice. Grave finally walked further into the room, stopping about 5 feet from the table. He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down, his posture relaxed, but his eyes never losing their intensity. He gently pushed the crumpled homework paper with his boot toward Elara. The world is full of people who will try to convince you that you are small, that you are weak, that you don't matter, Grave said, his voice now lower, almost confidential. He was speaking directly to Elara, weaving a shield of words around her. They'll use fear, shame, and things like that word your mother just used. They'll try to break you down so you can fit into the small box they built for you. Elara looked from Grave's face to Hammer's huge, impassive form, then back to the crumpled paper. She was starting to breathe a little easier, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a curious kind of fascination. These men, the ones who looked like the villains in movies, they were talking to her like she was important. Grave continued, his eyes locked on Elara's. The only thing you'll ever need to know is this. The moment you let someone else define your worth, you've already lost. Your worth is a steel anchor you carry inside you. It doesn't rust, it doesn't break, and it sure as hell doesn't come with a price tag from someone who doesn't even know how to hold their own life together. He gestured with a scarred hand towards Sarah, who was now weeping softly, leaning against the wall, defeated. He pulled a folded $100 bill from his pocket and placed it on the table. Now that homework, that's just a piece of paper. You can start a new one. This money is for you. Get something good tomorrow, a book, a toy, something that reminds you that you have value. He looked back at Sarah, and the calm vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp warning. Sarah, you have a choice. This little girl is not a punching bag. She's not your therapist. She's your responsibility. She is your only hope. You have 2 days. You find a family member, a safe place, or a friend who can take her, or you walk into a social services office and ask for help. You don't do either of those things, and we will be back. And the next conversation won't be with words. It will be permanent. Hammer finally moved, taking a slow, deliberate step away from Sarah and toward the door. The message was delivered. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about protecting the innocent, using their darkness as a tool for light. They were giving her a path to redemption, one last chance to choose her child over her illness. Grave stood up, his eyes meeting Elara's one last time. He gave her a slight nod, a silent vow of protection. Elara didn't nod back. She simply clutched the pencil tighter, a fragile spark of defiance replacing the fear in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. She felt defended. The 4 members of the Black Aces turned as one and walked out of the house. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving the sudden, profound silence in their wake. Sarah slid down the wall, clutching her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. A broken woman finally facing the mirror held up by the outlaws. Outside, the engines roared to life, a thunderous symphony of rebellion and justice. They didn't linger. They rode off into the night, the flash of chrome and black leather disappearing down the street. They were gone as quickly as they came, leaving behind not violence or chaos, but a silence that felt different now, a silence heavy with the promise of change. The Black Aces MC had disappeared, but the anchor Grave spoke of remained, planted firmly in Elara's heart. She looked down at the $100 bill, then at the crumpled homework, and finally, she looked at the front door. She picked up a new sheet of paper, squared her shoulders, and began to work on her math problem. She wasn't just working out a sum, she was working out her future. Her worth had just been declared not by a screaming mother, but by a brotherhood of outlaws. And that, in its own dark way, was the most valuable lesson of all.